5 men corner one kid in a prison yard. He's not the biggest guy there. He's not even old enough to legally drink back in the States. But he's got a knife he bought off a guard an hour earlier, and by the time the dust settles, 3 of the 5 men jumping him are dead on the concrete. That kid's name is Pedro Rodrigues Filho. By the time he's done, and it takes decades, the body count sits somewhere between 71 and over 100. He'll kill his own father with a shank, and according to several accounts from the time, take a bite out of his heart. He'll open fire on a wedding. He'll strangle a man to death in the back of a moving police van in front of a guard, for fun. And after all of that, Brazil will let him go free not once, but twice, because of one loophole in the law nobody saw coming. And here's the part that's almost harder to believe. Decades later, this man will have a YouTube channel, a TikTok with 400,000 followers, podcast interviews, a baptism video. This is the true story of the Brazilian Dexter and how a 14-year-old with a shotgun became one of the most prolific killers in South American history. Before we get into this, if you're the kind of person who needs to know why someone becomes this, hit subscribe now, because this channel is basically a deep dive into the worst days of the worst people's lives, twice a week. Let's get into it. Rewind to 1968. Small town called Santa Rita do Sapucaí, tucked into the hills of Minas Gerais, Brazil. Think of it like a sleepy rural town, the kind of place where everybody's business is everybody's business, kind of like a small town in the Appalachians, where the mayor's cousin runs the gas station and the whole county shows up to the same church on Sunday. Pedro's dad works as a security guard at the local school. One day, food starts disappearing from the cafeteria. Somebody points the finger at Pedro's father. The deputy mayor, a guy with real juice in this town, leans on the school, and just like that, Pedro's dad is out of a job. Now, for most 14-year-olds, that's just a bad week. Maybe you're mad at the dinner table. Maybe you write it off. Pedro Rodrigues Filho is not most 14-year-olds. Multiple accounts from people who knew him describe a kid who never really processed fear or guilt the way other people do. The kind of thing psychologists would later associate with psychopathy. And in his head, this wasn't a misunderstanding. This was an insult that needed an answer. So Pedro grabs his grandfather's shotgun. He walks, doesn't run, walks, right up to Santa Rita's town hall, finds the deputy mayor in broad daylight, and shoots him dead in front of witnesses. He's not finished. He tracks down the other security guard, the one Pedro's convinced actually stole the food, and kills him too. One 14-year-old kid who just became a fugitive for the rest of his life. Quick gut check. Where in the world are you watching this from right now? Drop it in the comments. I want to see how far this story's traveling. Pedro knows he can't stay in Santa Rita anymore. So he does what fugitives in rural Brazil did back then. He runs. 3 hours away, to a city called Mogi das Cruzes, on the edge of Sao Paulo. New town, new name on the street, eventually, Pedrinho Matador. Little Petey the Killer. And this is where the story should slow down. It doesn't. In Mogi das Cruzes, Pedro starts robbing drug dens. Not exactly a retirement plan, but it pays and it keeps him fed while he's on the run. Somewhere in this chaos, he meets a woman, Maria Aparecida Olympia. Everybody calls her Botinha. She's the widow of a local drug lord who's already been killed in the street wars that run this part of the city. They move in together, fast, and Pedro doesn't just become her partner. He essentially inherits her dead husband's operation. Think of it like a startup founder dying and the intern taking over the company by default, except the company is a drug corner, and the hostile takeover involves a gun. Pedro steps into the role, and to hold on to it, he starts eliminating anyone who challenges him, including 3 of his own dead boss's former guys, men who used to be on his side. By 1970, Botinha is pregnant with Pedro's child. For a minute, just a minute, it almost looks like this kid from Santa Rita might land somewhere close to a normal life. A family, a business, however dirty, a reason to stop. That minute doesn't last. If this story's got you leaning in already, do me a favor and smash that like button. It genuinely tells YouTube to put this in front of more people. And trust me, it gets so much darker from here. One day, while Pedro's out doing whatever it is Pedro does when he's at work, a rival gang breaks into his house. They kill Botinha, pregnant, alone, in her own home. When Pedro gets back and finds her, something in him doesn't just break, it goes fully off the rails. This is a guy who already had no problem pulling a trigger. Now he's got a reason that, in his mind, justifies anything. He goes on what can only be described as a manhunt, torturing, interrogating, executing anyone with even a loose connection to the people who might have done this. Think John Wick, except this isn't a movie, and the trail of bodies he leaves behind him stretches across the city for months. Eventually, somebody talks. A name comes back to him, a local drug gang, and its leader specifically. And here's where it goes from revenge killing to something the news back home would have called a massacre. The gang leader is throwing a wedding. Big event, lots of people, probably somebody's cousin getting married, family everywhere, the whole 9 yards. Pedro shows up with 4 other guys, all of them armed. They open fire on the crowd. When it's over, 7 people dead, 16 more wounded, most of whom had nothing to do with Bottini's murder at all. Second, gut check for you. What time is it where you're at right now? Because depending where you live, you might be watching this with your morning coffee, or you might be up way past midnight, like some of us. Either way, comment it. I read every single one. You'd think that's the peak. The worst thing this guy does. It's not even close. Months after the wedding massacre, Pedro finds out his cousin is pregnant, and the father of the baby has skipped town rather than take any responsibility. Straight up deadbeat, gone, no forwarding address as far as the family's concerned. Except the guy's own family gives up his location. Tells Pedro he's living in Rio de Janeiro now. Pedro travels to Rio, finds the man relaxing in a hammock on a farm, like nothing's wrong in the world. And according to accounts of the encounter, the two don't even exchange words. They just start shooting at each other. Only one of them walks away. By 1973, Pedro is 18 years old, and he's been a wanted man since he was 14. Police finally track him down and arrest him. He doesn't fight the charges, he confesses. 10 murders right off the bat. No lawyer games, no denial. The sentence, 128 years. For most people, that's the end of the story. Locked away, case closed, roll credits. For Pedro, prison is basically a change of scenery. Now I need you to stick around for this next part, because what happens inside these Brazilian prisons over the next several years is honestly the part of this story most people online have never even heard. And at the very end, I'll tell you exactly how a man convicted of 71 murders ends up walking free, twice. Being locked up doesn't slow Pedro down. If anything, it hands him a captive audience. Not long after his conviction, he's being transported in a police van, sitting next to another inmate, a man convicted of raping a woman. Pedro has a specific, burning hatred for that particular crime. Somewhere on that drive, with a guard sitting right there, Pedro strangles the man to death in the back seat. He's already facing over a century behind bars. What's one more? From here, Pedro settles into a pattern that will define the next several years of his life, killing fellow inmates. But not randomly, he develops something like a personal code. Rapists, child predators, fellow murderers he judges to be genuinely evil. In his own mind, he's not a monster in here. He's a one-man cleanup crew, judge, jury, and executioner, rolled into one cell block vigilante. Some later accounts even nickname him the Brazilian Dexter for exactly this reason, but it's not that clean. It never is. At one point, he kills his own cellmate, not because the guy was a criminal mastermind or a predator, but because the man snored too loud. That's it. That's the whole reason. Then there's the friend. Pedro forms a real bond with another inmate. They talk, they trust each other, about as close as you can get to a friendship behind bars. Then Pedro finds out this friend is in prison because he killed his own sister. And despite the friendship, maybe because of how seriously Pedro takes his own code, Pedro kills him too. He beheads the man with a knife. Later, word gets to Pedro that a group of inmates is planning to jump him. He buys a knife off a guard ahead of time. Sure enough, 5 men ambush him in the yard. He kills 3 of them, survives the other 2. All right, one more for you before we get to the ending nobody sees coming. What's the weather like where you're watching this from? I've got people telling me it's snowing, and people telling me it's 95 degrees, all watching the same video. Comment it, let's see the range. Then comes the darkest chapter. Pedro's father, the same man whose firing kicked off this entire nightmare back in 1968, gets into a violent fight with Pedro's mother on the outside. He kills her with a machete. Police arrest him. He's convicted and sent to prison, to the same prison Pedro's already in, just a different wing. When Pedro hears what his father did, there's no hesitation. He reportedly bribes guards to let him cross into his father's section, telling them he just wants a visit. They let him through. He walks to his father's cell, pulls a shank, and stabs him to death. Several accounts from the time claim that Pedro then removed a piece of his father's heart and bit into it. It's one of the most repeated and most disputed details of his entire story, and to this day, it's never been independently confirmed. True or exaggerated legend, it's the detail that turned Pedrinho Matador from a local name into a national myth. Here's the twist almost nobody outside Brazil knows. At the time, Brazilian law capped the maximum time anyone could actually serve in prison at 30 years, no matter what your sentence said on paper. Didn't matter if a judge wrote down 128 years, the system was legally required to let you out after 30. So in 2007, at 52 years old, Pedro Rodrigues Filho, convicted of 71 murders, walks out a free man. He doesn't stay out for long. In 2011, he's back behind bars on riot and false imprisonment charges tied to a prison uprising. He serves 7 years and walks out again in 2018, now 64 years old. And this is where the story takes the turn that honestly sounds made up if you didn't know it was real. Pedro becomes a local legend not in spite of his past, but because of it. To a lot of people, he's less serial killer and more folk anti-hero, a guy who mostly went after other criminals. He starts a YouTube channel, vlogs, hangs out content, a baptism video where he publicly finds religion, a TikTok account that racks up 400,000 followers. He goes on podcasts, talks openly about what he did, and tells people point blank not to live the life he lived. For a few years, it almost looks like a redemption story. Then, on the morning of March 5th, 2023, Pedro is sitting on a relative's porch. A black car rolls up. 2 masked men get out. They shoot him 4 times. Then they finish the job with a knife. He's killed almost instantly. To this day, police have never identified who did it or why. Though given the sheer number of people this man crossed over 5 decades, the list of possible suspects is basically endless. So that's the story of Pedro Rodrigues Filho, a kid who picked up a shotgun at 14 and didn't stop until he'd left one of the strangest, bloodiest legacies in Brazilian history. Officially convicted of 71 murders. Unofficially, some say over 100. If you made it all the way to the end of this one, drop a comment with just the number 71, so I know exactly how many of you are riding with me until the credits roll. And subscribe, because next case is coming Thursday, and it might be even darker than this one.